Originally, the schedule had us doing introductions first and then me doing an overview of the project. It occurred to me while going over this this morning that it might actually make sense to do them in the reverse direction, because the overview will give you a sense of the different pieces of the project and how they fit together. And then if we do introductions, people can more easily identify where they fit into things. Okay, so I'll do a brief overview of the project, and then we'll go around and do introductions, and then we have a break, and then we're going to dive into more detail on some specific parts of the project. All right, so as I said to our REU students during lunch, welcome to all of you who have just joined us for the summer. We're really excited to be working with all of you and are excited about the things you'll bring to the project over the course of the summer. I'm Salil, a theoretical computer scientist on the faculty here at Harvard and lead PI on the project. And what I'm going to try to do here is just give you a taste of what this project is about, what the high-level goals and what the different pieces are. And over the next day, you'll hear about those in more detail. All right, so the motivation for our project when we started it a few years ago was the exciting transformation that was happening throughout the social sciences due to the immense volume and variety of new sources of data on human behavior that were becoming available. Right, so instead of being limited to surveys of a few thousand participants, researchers increasingly could do studies on the scale of hundreds of thousands by making use of data from cell phone GPS readings, internet search logs, political blog posts, social network activity, and so on. And in addition, the internet and data repositories like those supported by running the Dataverse, which you'll hear about more later today, make it much easier for researchers to share the data obtained from such sources with other researchers to enable replication, reproducibility, and entirely new analyses of the data that's been collected. However, a major problem for realizing the full potential of this vision of computational, data-driven social science is that many of these sources of data contain sensitive information about individuals, and currently social science researchers aren't equipped with tools to adequately protect the privacy of the data subjects while analyzing and sharing the data. Okay, so what's the traditional approach for dealing with privacy, not just in social science, but in all human subjects research? It's to strip PII, personally identifying information, from the data set. So you remove obvious identifiers, name, address, social security number, maybe exact date of birth, and so on. And what you're left with looks like an anonymous data set, and you might hope that you can now share that data freely without any privacy concerns. Unfortunately, now it's quite well understood, and we'll talk about this in more detail later, that this traditional approach of stripping identifying information from data sets does not work well, that it is often possible to figure out who the people are in these supposedly anonymized data sets by using the information that remains. And so what you're left with is a very stark trade-off between the usefulness of the data on one hand and the privacy that you provide to the subjects. If you only remove obvious identifiers, you've just made it slightly harder to figure out who's who in the data set, and you're providing very weak privacy protections. And certainly something that may not be responsible to do if you're going to post the data for sharing in some public repository. On the other hand, if you more aggressively try to de-identify the data and really try to strip out everything that you can imagine might be useful in identifying the individuals in the data set, you often are forced to remove the very information that people are interested in studying. And you're left with a data set that has very little utility. So what is the consequence of this is that these privacy concerns are coming into conflict with the push for open sharing of data by the research community and funding agencies, that increasingly there are even mandates by journals and funding agencies that if you collect data funded by public funds or to publish work in a particular journal, you have to make the data available to others. Because of privacy concerns, many researchers are refusing to share their data, and sometimes quite reasonably so. And so we have this conflict of values in the research community. Okay, so the goal of the project in cartoon form is to try to reconcile this tension between privacy and open sharing of data. Right? Try to push this privacy versus utility curve further out so that you can have retain the usefulness of these data sets while doing a good job protecting the privacy of the subjects. And we want to do this by trying to develop tools for researchers to use to more responsibly share their data while protecting privacy. And we're trying to do this through a collaboration between several different disciplines, I think all of which are represented in the room at the moment. So, of course, we need to be working with the social scientists who are collecting and analyzing this human subject data that we're that's the source of the problem. And what we want to do, of course, in this project is enable them to do their work better. And so social scientists play a big part in the project because whatever we do, it has to be designed to support the work of social scientists. Computer science has developed over the past 10 to 15 years a rich understanding of the privacy risks that could be present in data and the sharing of information about data sets and methods to address those, and a sort of rich theory for understanding what is privacy protection. And law and policy, which give us an understanding of what are the responsibilities of researchers in handling privacy-sensitive data sets. What are their obligations to their subjects, as well as giving us a set of tools that can help in managing the responsible sharing of data, legal instruments to accompany the technological ones that may come from computer science, and statistics, which is a source of many of the methods used in social science for the analysis of data, and also has had a lot of interplay with the computer science thinking about data privacy. So to bring these disciplines together, there are 4 institutes at Harvard that are working together. From the School of Engineering and Computer Science, there is the Center for Research on Computation and Society, which is a center based in computer science that aims to bring computer scientists into interaction with people from other disciplines to do computer science research aimed at problems of societal importance. And it was through CIRCUS, that's CRCS is how it's pronounced for short, through CIRCUS is how I personally got interested and became aware of research on data privacy. There's the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, which is where we are right now, which, among other things, develops methods and tools for this, to enable this transformation that I mentioned earlier that's happening in the social sciences, to develop methods and tools for the analysis of, the quantitative analysis of social science data sets, right? So helping turn social science from from more qualitative discipline to one that's more quantitative and data-driven. And the Berkman Center for Internet and Society, which is a center that was founded at Harvard Law School and has a long history of high-impact work on the interaction between technology and law and policy and other societal issues, problems of governance and innovation. and including on issues related to privacy, and they are the ones that lead our efforts around law and policy. And then the Data Privacy Lab is a lab run by LaTanya Sweeney, whose work I'll talk about shortly. She's one of the co-PIs on the project, which is housed here in the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, specifically to have an in-house unit helping the social science researchers deal with privacy issues. All right, so the PIs and senior researchers on the project, many of whom you'll meet today and tomorrow, not all because some are away at the moment. All right, so from Circus and computer science, in addition to me, there's Steve Chung, who's a faculty member who works in programming languages and programming languages approaches to security. Is Steve? Yeah, Steve. He's away. Okay. Kobe Nissim, who's sitting there in the back, is also a theoretical computer scientist. Is one of the founders of work on differential privacy, which plays a big role in our project, and you'll hear about that later tomorrow, I guess, from me and him. And Marco Gabardi, sitting here, is visiting us from the University of Dundee in Scotland, and like Steve, works on programming languages approaches to security, as well as specifically programming languages approaches to privacy and differential privacy. From IQSS, we have James Honecker, who's a senior research scientist here in IQSS. Social scientist, works on quantitative methods and statistical software. Gary King is the founder and director of IQSS. So he's very occupied these few days with the Dataverse community meeting that's happening in parallel. But I mean, I guess he has done too many things over the course of his career to try to enumerate them. But specifically the sort of the vision of IQSS for providing methods and tools and data repositories for social science has come under his leadership, and that's what we are trying to support in our project through our privacy tools. And Mercedes Crosas is what's her title now? Is Director of Data Science? Director of Data Science here in IQSS. She's also very occupied with the Dataverse community meeting, but I'm sure you'll get to meet her in the near future. And also when we attend some of the Dataverse community meeting presentations, you'll probably get to see Gary and Mercedes. Right, the Berkman Center. So Urs Gasser is the executive director of the Berkman Center. He is out of town this week, but I'm sure you'll see him in meetings in the coming weeks. In addition to this project, he's done a lot of thinking on other aspects of privacy. The Berkman Center has a number of other projects associated with privacy. David O'Brien also helps lead our efforts with the Berkman Center. He's also out of town this week. You'll hopefully meet him soon. Alexandra Wood is a fellow at the Berkman Center, and so she's the lead who's here at the moment. From MIT, Micah Altman, you'll hear from him tomorrow. He's the director of research at MIT Libraries. He's a social scientist, works on information science, and certainly has interest in the kinds of things we're doing from his work at MIT Libraries. Edo Iroldi is the co-PI from statistics. I guess represented here today by Vishesh, a postdoc working with him and me. And LaTanya Sweeney is the director of this data privacy lab, and she's one of the first computer scientists to start thinking about these sort of data privacy issues, to point out the failure of the traditional anonymization techniques that people have been using for a long time. All right, so what are we, so there are many different problems that one can try to address in privacy, and many different places one can try to address those problems. And can't try to do it. It's good to have a concrete focus for as a target for your efforts. And our focus is on data repositories. All right, so thinking about these privacy problems from the perspective of a data repository, which is the place where researchers come to share their data with other researchers. In particular, we're trying to build tools to integrate into the Dataverse software, which is a infrastructure for hosting data repositories. It's used to host repositories in social science and other fields. The instance here at Harvard is, by some counts, the largest repository of social science data sets in the world. This screenshot is out of date. Dataverse recently, I guess with James' presentation, you'll probably see more up-to-date screenshots on Dataverse. So Dataverse just released a new 4.0 version, which looks much nicer than this, but the front, I couldn't find a good page that had all these nice statistics about it, hosting. I think I said to someone before, 60,000 studies, so 54,000 studies, over 700,000 files, and so on. So it's a good place to have as the target of our efforts because it's already an infrastructure that's widely in use. And so if we can build tools into data repositories to help researchers in handling privacy-sensitive data, we immediately have a large user base for those tools at our fingertips. Okay, so what is the problem? The problem is that currently most data repositories, in particular the Dataverse ones, are not equipped to take on privacy-sensitive data. So generally speaking, in most Dataverse repositories, the user who comes to upload their data to share with other researchers has to assert that there's no privacy constraints associated with the data. And in the cases where it is allowed to upload such a data set, those data sets are typically not made available for download. So you see, like here, these are data sets that are considered safe and one can download them, but these are restricted data sets. And the only way to get access to those data sets is by a manual application for access, which typically has to go back to the original researcher and their institution, and can often be a long process for getting approved to have access to the data. Okay, and so the goal is to enable wider access to such data while making sure that we're still providing adequate privacy protections to the subjects. Okay, so what are the challenges here? So one, which we haven't talked about yet, is even if one thinks about it just from the legal point of view, what the responsibilities of the researcher are in handling a privacy-sensitive data set, there is a vast array of different laws and regulations, in addition to disciplinary norms and best practices that a researcher should be keeping in mind and should be acting consistently with in the handling of any privacy-sensitive data set. And so this is just a list here of a few of this, the list goes on and on of some of the laws and regulations that the Berkman team has looked at involving health data and education data. These are only ones at the federal level. It's a very, very partial list. And then there's also state and local laws and regulations. So navigating even the responsibilities, much less acting consistently with them, is already very complicated. Second is something that I talked about earlier, that the traditional approach of stripping identifiers from data sets provides either very weak privacy protections or very poor utility, or both. And this was one of the first striking examples of how, to make it more concrete, how traditional anonymization can fail was shown by our co-PI Latanya Sweeney in the late 90s when she took medical insurance claims data that was released by the state of Massachusetts and showed how she could identify individuals in that data set. And how did she do it? Well, at that point in time, it was considered safe to include zip code, date of birth, and sex in an anonymized data set. And so this medical claims data had those fields in it. And she then linked this data set using those fields with publicly available voter registration lists. And it turns out that well over half the US population is uniquely identified by their zip code, date of birth, and sex. Okay, so you would think, I mean, my date of birth, that's not very sensitive. There are a lot of people born in the same day as me. A lot of people who live in the same zip code as me. Certainly a lot of people who have the same sex as me. But you take the combination of these three things, and suddenly you're unique. There's a good chance that you're unique. Right? And so because of that, she was able to identify individuals in this medical claims data and find out their name and address from the voter registration list. And in particular, she identified the medical record of William Weld, who was the governor of Massachusetts at the time. Okay, and so that was a good way to get a lot of attention on this problem. And she was one of the first to point it out. And since then, there have been many more examples of this type, and often much more subtle. So it's not a matter of just even thinking of your sort of the obvious things that we traditionally think of as identifying information. But people have shown that all kinds of subtle things, the dates that you watched a particular movie and may have reviewed it on the Internet Movie Database could help identify you in an anonymized movie rental database. Right? That was shown for the Netflix challenge, and there have been many other examples. So showing that this de-identification is a really hard task. And certainly, a lay researcher who has no experience in privacy and is just trying to do their work, collect interesting data and analyze it and share it with others, can't be expected to do de-identification right. And then finally, the other thing that I also mentioned before is for data set that is deemed privacy sensitive, the process, right, so people still have the idea that other researchers should be able to access the data if, through by applying and showing that they, maybe getting IRB approval. This can often be a very lengthy and arduous process. We're told, for example, for MOOC data coming from Harvard and MIT, that the edX data, 6 months of negotiation between institutions is not unheard of. I mean, that's a long delay to put into someone's PhD, like trying to get their hands on a data set. Okay, so we want to try to deal with some of these problems and make sharing easier for non-expert lay researchers, meaning they shouldn't have to have expertise in data privacy, in computer science or statistics to be able to deal with their, or law, to deal with their privacy-sensitive data. All right, and so how are we trying to do this? We're trying to build a bunch of tools. We are thinking about the entire pipeline from when a researcher conceives of a study and submits a proposal to their IRB to run this study, and also hopefully that comes with a data sharing plan, how they're going to share their data with others, to then obtaining the appropriate kind of consent from their subjects, collecting their data. But our main point of intervention, again, is the point in time in which the researcher comes to share the data with others. They come to a data repository like Dataverse and say, okay, I want to make my data available to others, but I'm worried about privacy. How can you help me? Okay, and so the types of things that we're working on, so one big component where we've devoted a lot of effort, and you'll hear about later today, is in data tags, which there's several different pieces to data tags, but one way of thinking of it, it's It's a tool that helps a researcher sort of navigate through the legal and other constraints that there might be on the handling of their data, and then come to a conclusion about how to tag the data with policies to govern its handling by the repository. All right. So from things like does the data need to be stored encrypted, to policies about who should have access to the data, in what ways can you make access to the data, and when you give someone access to the data, what kind of terms of use do you need to include? Okay, and so this is a lot of the legal research in the project plays a role in data tags, as well as there are computer science components for thinking about how one designs and optimizes the process of surveying a researcher and assigning tags. Another place where we've devoted a lot of effort, and you'll hear, and is a big, and many of you today are going to be working on this summer, is on differential privacy, which is a way of setting up a privacy protective interface for doing data analysis. Okay, so instead of letting people download some version of the data set, we're going to try to provide them some interface for doing statistical analysis of data without downloading it, and we want to make sure that the interface is designed in a way that protects privacy, that makes sure that information that shouldn't leak out can't leak out. Okay. And there's other things, I mean, even thinking about how, when we're going to do identification, how do we do it better? How do we understand the risks? There's work happening there. Informing data tags is all kinds of research on privacy laws and regulations that have been done by and are still being done by the Berkman team. And also thinking about how to inform policy around the handling of privacy-sensitive research data and how that should, for example, be taken into account in the way IRBs govern research is also all sort of within scope of our project. All right, so let's see, how are we doing on time? All right, so it's been half an hour. I'll wrap up. So I'm not going to talk in too much detail, just point out some things that maybe didn't come out before. So part of what we are doing is thinking about the relationship between the way people think about privacy from a legal point of view and the way that's encoded in laws and regulations and the way in computer science and statistics we think about privacy, and how can we get these to mesh. If you're interested in that, there are meetings that you can attend to hear about and participate in those discussions. A big focus this summer, the first time we have a bunch of the interns who are coming from social science backgrounds, is in understanding how can we make our tools actually useful for social scientists to do their work. I mean, evaluating from that perspective. So not evaluating from the perspective of what do computer scientists think that social scientists need to do their work, but actually, how can we really make sure that that the tools we're building can fit into the workflow of practicing social scientists. I mentioned the kind of tools we're working on, for example, algorithmic ones like differential privacy and legal ones like data tags. And then there's also a bunch of kind of education outreach. One thing that's very important in our project is to try to produce open resources that we make as widely available as possible throughout our work. So it's something to keep in mind for the work you do. If you're writing code, that's code that we want to eventually make publicly available and let other people use. If you're developing a suite of test data sets, ideally that's something that we could also make publicly available, unless the data sets are themselves privacy sensitive. Legal work that comes out of the project, we also want to make the outputs of that as available as possible. So keep it in mind in the work that you do this summer, and if you have ideas there's this stuff that we're working on that could really, that we could package nicely to make available in some way, please do share those ideas. All right, and then hopefully as we go around and do introductions, I think one of the sort of educational aspects of the project that hopefully you all will enjoy is the working with and interaction with a multidisciplinary team. And we'll try to give you all a taste of that and not just have you only sort of in the weeds in your own specific project. All right, I don't think I'm going to try to, you all have this schedule in email, I think. Later today, so after we do introduction, okay, so we'll do introductions, and then James will talk about Dataverse, and you'll hear about the legal research and data tags. Tomorrow morning, Micah Altman will give some more high-level perspectives on the managing of confidential and privacy-sensitive data. I'll tell you a bit about differential privacy in a non-technical way, so this is really for everyone to get a taste of what we're working on there. And then we are going to move to some more technical, on tomorrow afternoon, more technical tutorials around differential privacy and the programming language R. Now, everyone is welcome to attend that. Last year we did have some of the, at least one of the law interns did attend some of the more technical tutorials that we did. And in general, throughout the summer, we're happy to, if any of you have interest. So it doesn't need to relate to your project. If you're interested in attending, please do come. Thursday, mainly, we have in mind to attend parts of the Dataverse community meeting that's happening over these few days. As we mentioned, a few people are kind of missing these meetings because of that. And in the morning, there's some presentations actually by members of our project team and related to our project. In the afternoon, there's a breakout session on sharing of sensitive data, which can be interesting to attend. And then on Friday, we're going to continue with some more technical tutorials related to differential privacy. Right? And that's a kind of intensive first week. But then going throughout the summer, we gradually will slow to a more modest frequency of meetings so that you can actually work on your projects. There's a weekly all-hands meeting, which everyone should try to attend. And this is really where we synchronize among all the groups and report on what we're doing. On Mondays and Wednesdays is the time where Monday morning and Wednesday morning is when the more sort of technical side of the project, working on differential privacy and also doing tutorials on statistics and programming language R. We'll be having meetings Monday and Wednesday, 2-hour meetings Monday and Wednesday morning. Again, others are welcome to join. Kobe leads a group of a number of people, including people from the Berkman team, like Alex, on what we call the de-identification working group. But what this is really about, or what its current focus is largely on, is this bridging the way we think about privacy from a computer science perspective with the legal way of thinking about privacy. And so if you're interested in either just listening in on those discussions or participating, do join us. You're welcome. Is there a regular data tags? Not at the moment, but that may be, keep your eye out if you're kind of interested in the data tags. From time to time, there are regular meetings around that. You'll have meetings with your individual mentors, the other interns from your community. Either the C's IQSS also has its own REU students. Berkman, I know, has a larger group of interns. We do try to do some group social activities during the summer. In particular, last summer we did a group hike. Hopefully we can do that again. But if you have any other ideas for either social or intellectual activities that would be fun, just propose them or organize them. Like you could say, I want to organize a reading group on some aspect of privacy law, or on pick a favorite topic. That's, it doesn't have to necessarily be that closely related to the project. Just send out an email to the privacy tools-all mailing list and say, I'm going to organize this. Who wants to join? Right? And Kimya can help find rooms and coordinate. And I think that's about it. I can take some questions, and again, just repeat that we're all really looking forward to working with you all this summer. Any questions? Yes, Dan.
Since we are just going over the overview, what would be, in your opinion, the next big advance, next big step that you're looking for in this project to come out of the project?
Great. So I think that's there's different pieces have that advance associated with them. I think in general, we are now reaching the point in the project where we see the light at the end of the tunnel, in that we can really imagine tools that we can put in front of users, at least prototypes that we can put in front of users to start playing with and seeing how well it works for their purposes. This is true both on the side of the differential privacy, as well as data tags, as well as some of the writing that's happening around this kind of de-identification and kind of bridging the CS and law way of thinking, that those two we can now envision getting those to a point where we're producing something that can actually be useful in informing users and how they handle data. And so I think in all the parts of the project, that's kind of where we want to push really hard at this point, is to actually reach that in in the coming half year or so, or over the course of the summer. So coming half year, I don't know about actually having it for handling. Some of these things won't be ready to handle actual sensitive data, sometimes for some technical issues that we've ignored that would need to be handled in order to really have it out in the wild. But I mean, that's pretty high level, but I think then that can be made more concrete when looking at the specific parts of the project. And when you hear more about, for example, the differential privacy part of the project, you might get a sense of what that means. Others from the team want to comment on big, ambitious goals?
I think just to rephrase exactly the same thing, part of what's so ambitious about having a tool, even as a prototype, that isn't actually handling sensitive data, it is handling something in the style of sensitive data, having a prototype that we put out connected to the Dataverse, is that this will be the first time that a lot of people outside of the CS community have really thought about the existence of these tools even being possible for sharing social science data. So having a prototype in which social scientists can imagine what the workflow could be for dealing with data through the interface and only getting back lengthy versions of answers, that will be a big step from a social science perspective. A lot of impact, and it will change the way social scientists think about the protocols they use for using data, and we can get a little bit more about privacy preservation. All of the if I'm signed away my life in a contract and I don't get access to the data. So that's a big change from a social science perspective. It's the same step, but it has a big impact on the privacy.
I should say we do care. This is kind of an applied outcome of the project, and I think it is the thing that I would identify when we think about the project as a whole. This type of outcome. But I'm a theorist, and I care a lot about, and I think in the project we care a lot about also the scholarly outcomes, not just in supporting the scholarship of social science, but in our understanding of data privacy. And that's something that's been happening. There have been contributions of that type happening throughout the project, and they're continuing to happen, and we're going to continue to push on those. And those are also important to us, and they're really interesting open problems and questions in all of those as well. But if I had to pick out a single thing, I think it would be what James said. All right, great. So why don't we go around and do introductions, and hopefully this gives a little bit more context. You can understand why is there a a law student and a social science, political science student and a computer science student and a government student and all in the same room. Okay, so I already introduced myself, right, Salil. I'll let Kimia continue.
I'm Kimia Mavon, and I'm the project coordinator for CRCS, or Circus.
Hi, I'm Lim. I'm from UCLA. I originally came from Korea. My major is political science. I studied statistics a little bit.
Hi, I'm Jessica. I go to Wellesley College. I'm from Vancouver, and I'm a computer science.
Hi, I'm Hajing. I'm a computer science and student here at Harvard.
Hi, I'm Dan Hughes. I'm at UMass Lowell studying economics, politics, and science.
Hi, I'm Paper. I'm from College William and Mary, and I'm studying international relations and economics and management.
Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a visiting scientist from MIT, and I work in analysis communication. And I'm interested in learning about different projects and research.
Great, welcome.
I'm Alexandra Wu. I'm a fellow at the Development Center, and I work on legal and policy aspects of the project.
I'm Ryan Rogers. I'm a PhD student at Penn in computer science and math.
Peter Durazio. I'm a postdoc at IQSS. I work on data exploration and analysis tools for unrestricted data right now, and generally called two ravens, and define that to restricted data.
My name is Otifit. I'm a postdoc at the Circus. My focus is in computer science and engineering.
I'm Jack. I've been a teaching assistant on the project this past year. I'll be a grad student here in the fall, working on theory and implementation of different classes.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I just graduated from Harvard, and I studied government and computer science.
Hi, I'm Robin Singh. I'm a computer scientist and working on cryptography and Python.
Hi everyone, my name is Vishak. I'm a circus postdoc and a statistician, and I'm working on different society problems and sessions.
I'm James Foster. I'm a research scientist here at IQSS. I work on systematic social sciences and software, physical software.
My name is Andrea. I just finished my undergraduate degree next month in politics at the University of
Everyone, my name is Cameron Merrill. I'm a computer scientist senior from Michigan State University.
I'm Grant Nelson, and I'm in the Berkman Center, so doing the legal studies.
I'm Sandra. Doing the backend.
I'm Allison McKee. I'm a senior computer science engineer at Intern.
My name is Patrick Moore. I'm a third year law student from University of Washington, and I'm also a Berkman Center.
My name is Aaron Benbenek. I'm a special student here at Harvard doing computer science.
Hi, I'm Ron Tongami. I'm also president center of Intern grants, and we actually go to law school together. So I'm going to be a third year.
Hi, I'm Thomas. I'm a computer science PhD student here at Minnesota.
I'm Michael Buckman. I'm a computer science PhD at the University and the Fellowship at IQSS. I'm working on the
I'm Mark Bunn. I'm a grad student here in computer science, working on differential privacy and interplay with computational complexity, photography, and machine learning.
I'm Michael Gaguardi. I'm a visiting scholar at the city from University of Dublin, Scotland, and I'm a computer scientist working on programming languages and differential.
Great. I think we had one more person come in. No problem. Great, welcome. All right, welcome everyone. Any last questions before we kind of dive into some of the pieces in more detail? James, I think you're up.
Okay, so
I'm James Honecker. I was going to point out Vito, but I think he's just popped out now. So I work at IQSS, which is this building. I'm one floor up on the west side. I'm a research scientist here with these guys. Let me think. Okay, so the Institute for Quantitative Social Science, that is an interdisciplinary group. It's not really a part of any department, but it is in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences here. And it brings together affiliate faculty who do quantitative work. So there's an emphasis on social science, but it's not only social scientists that work with us. We do a lot of work with people in the School of Public Health and people in the school and the medical school. We work increasingly with the people in the astronomy department. So it's more that we so there's more of an emphasis on quantitative than on social science. Although also there are centers in IQSS that aren't quantitative at all. So exactly what it is, I think sometimes it's referred to. There have been thoughts about expanding it to the Institute for Quantitative and Qualitative Social Science and Other Sciences. It could just be the Institute for Science at some point. But as a group, it has a deep commitment to scientific explorations of questions that generally involve individuals and stars. So the fun part of my job is that I get to work with a different set of people in each project, and sometimes a different set of people every day of the week. I work in the data science group, which is run by Mercedes. She would be here, except across the hall we're meeting with all the different people who work in Dataverse. Of all the people in the building who could talk about Dataverse, I'm probably the least qualified, but they are all in the other building. So hopefully there's not an explosion over there and I'm the only person who's left who knows Dataverse. However, I will talk about Dataverse today, and if you have more questions, you'll learn more in the future community meetings. And I use it a lot, but I don't stick my hands into the Dataverse code very often. The Dataverse project is the latest version of a long history of projects here at Harvard and in IQSS and the things that existed before IQSS for archiving, saving, preserving social science data, and also making it open to the research community for replication. So at the heart of good social science, good science, right, is the idea that anything that you do scientifically, it should be possible for other people to replicate exactly what it is that you did, okay? Perhaps by collecting new data and running the same process, or perhaps by examining the data that you have if it's observational and can't be replicated. We don't want to replicate World War II too many times, so we'll just stick with one version of World War II for now. But whatever the data is that's been collected should be open to other researchers to be able to investigate the ideas that you've come up with and see how robust they are, or whether you can expand them. And so that requires that data is preserved in the long term. It's often the case that when researchers haven't been playing with a data set for a month or two, or a year or two, or a decade or two, they forget where it is, or they forget what file format it exists in. And it's arduous to make that constantly available to other researchers who might want it. So putting it into a repository, right, where every time file formats change, it's automatically upgraded to new file formats. Where if people are trying to investigate the data from different perspectives using different tools that have their own file formats, it's translated into SPSS or into Stata or into R or into Excel or whatever it is that you're using to investigate that data. Also, providing a method for citing data. Another central tenet of sort of good science is not only that data is open, but that people who collect data and use it have an incentive to share it. Okay, so the coinage of academia is citation, right? If I write good articles and other people are using my work, they'll cite me and say, my work is based on this work, which has already proved some things that I need. Similarly with data, if people are using data that other people have collected, good principles should say, I'm going to be using this data, which I didn't collect myself. Or I've added a few years of data to this other expansive project that somebody else used. But there's no there normally to cite for data, right? So normally citation has typically been about articles, right? People have written things, books or articles that exist in journals. They're published. Those have a citation to them, but the data itself is just this sort of nebulous thing that is hard to keep track of. And so sometimes there's an article associated with the data that's sort of a placeholder for the data itself. One of the key things that Dataverse does is provide a DOI, a thing that's firmly fixed to that data set and exists for all time that can be used as a citation. So I use this data set and I merge in a few other variables. I can say, these are exactly the data sets that I've used, and I have a persistent link that anybody else can follow that DOI and find that data set at any other time. And those citations, accumulate, and the scholar who created that data is now being cited for a product, an academic scholarly product that they've been creating. Okay? And then also, in addition to Dataverse, IQSS spends its time, has a bunch of people who sort of work on statistical methods and quantitative methods more broadly for analyzing social science data and sort of tackling the kinds of endemic problems that broadly social scientists or people who have observational and experimental data stumble onto. So I often work in problems of missing data and measurement error, which are two classes of problems you often get when you're trying to observe individuals and collect corpora of data on them. I've been working on privacy with this group for over a year now, I suppose. I always think about how old my daughter is and then add 2 months, and so it's like, which of those two projects is more important to me? It's hard to say. So here's Dataverse. Let me give you a sense of it. Yeah. Which one screams at me more? When I don't do what they want. Okay, so here's the architecture of Dataverse. Dataverse is going to be a repository so that individuals have data sets. They want to make it open. They want to be good scientists. They want to make the data open to other people. They want to be cited for what they've already done. They want other people to extend their work. They want other people to maybe validate that their work is valid. Also, they want to get funding from the NIS, for the NSF, for the NIH, or any of these funding agencies, Ford, who normally attach writers and say, well, look, if we're paying you for to collect data, out of a public grant, then that data belongs to the public. And so the data needs to go somewhere and be made available. So Dataverse is a repository for doing this and abstracting that process and making sure that users don't have to keep the latest version of their data set on available in some crazy way. Here's the architecture. You can think of, you'll hear these things called Dataverses. This is Dataverse 4.0, came out just a month and a half ago. There's a slightly different architecture that Dataverse now uses. There are these, think of these, a Dataverse as being a container in which you can put things, okay? So we'll talk about Dataverses. A Dataverse is really just sort of an abstract location for things to exist inside. Dataverses themselves might be put inside Dataverses. So if you want to think of it somewhat as a folder structure that has all of these attached tools to it that keep whatever is in the Dataverse persistent and converted across time and has a citation link. And then inside Dataverses also, I can put data sets. So I might drop data sets into a Dataverse and other Dataverses into a Dataverse. And in a data set is more like what you might think of as a database, right, from a CS perspective. But it could be a database, but it could also be all sorts of things that are attached and grouped around that particular data set. So a data set might be the files that contain the raw data, but it might also include all of the documentation that you need in order to understand what that data is doing. And that might be in a separate file, or it might be attached to the data depending upon the data format. There might be short and long versions that explain what those questions are. And then also in this nebulous thing called a data set, which kind of looks like a database but isn't, there might also be code that the researcher has made available that explains, I created this figure in my article in Nature, and here's the code that you need to move from this data to generate that figure, or to rerun my analysis and see how I created my estimate. And also metadata. So metadata is a header that comes with the data set that explains what's in that data set. Not the data itself, but descriptions of what the data is and descriptions of what the data means. So metadata might include, this is the size of the file, but it might also include, here are some summary statistics about these variables, or it might include how was the data collected and who collected it. And the metadata is going to be very important to us. The first day of the Dataverse conference over there right now is entirely about metadata. and making sure that metadata across different repositories that different people use all speaks the same language. But metadata is sort of how I find a data set that I want to use. It's how I explore across repositories to say, I need data that covers this country in this year and contains economic indicators. Right? That information should be in the metadata. In some sense, it's like the card catalog for that data set. But it might contain lots of other things. And we're using the metadata itself to preserve some of the things about the data that we can make public while shielding the actual data file itself, perhaps in some layering that in a deeper level of security. So those are the things that go into a data set. A data set is a data file at its heart, probably. Also with some documentation, maybe some code we run on it, and this header file, the metadata. And then data sets go into Dataverses, and other Dataverses might go into Dataverses, and it could be Dataverses all the way down. Okay? That's the basic architecture of Dataverse. Here's what Dataverse looks. You were promised a glimpse of what Dataverse 4 looks like. Here's an example of what Dataverse 4 looks like. I ran a little search on privacy, and it's telling me that there are 3 Dataverses which have privacy in their title. One of them is the Privacy Tools Dataverse here, the Dataverse for this particular project. 384 data sets that came up with a search term in there for privacy, and 241 files. If I hadn't done a search right now, actually maybe I'll click to, if I click to Dataverse right now and open it up, here's what it looks like on a browser. Here's a splash page. Oops. Let's see if I can get this to be the right size. Yes, okay. It's telling me that right now there's 58,000 data sets. Most of these are social science data sets. On the Harvard instance of the Dataverse, there are Dataverse instances all around the world, or at least in other universities, including China and Amsterdam, so I can say all around the world. There's a Dataverse instance up the hill at the Center for Astronomy that contains a lot of the imagery data from the astronomical disciplines. There are Dataverse instances that are being set up in the Harvard Medical School to hold lab data from medical files. So we got about 60,000 data sets that are in some nature social science. Most of those don't contain any private information. If people have private information, we sort of say, wait up. We're going to build some tools, then you can bring them here. That's what Dataverse looks like. That's dataverse.harvard.edu if you want to see the Harvard-specific Dataverse instance, or thedata.org if you want to see a splash page for the entire Dataverse project. Let me go back to my slides. Okay, so that's how Dataverse works. In my end, again, I don't necessarily myself. There is a Dataverse team, which you will undoubtedly meet up with. One of you has a mentor with Gustavo, who's one of the lead engineers on the Dataverse project. I work in the Stats and Analytics group, which is slightly separately, and we build tools that sort of, often these tools are wrappers or layers around Dataverse. So Dataverse is at the heart, and then there's some tool that involves some statistical exploration of something that exists in Dataverse. These are some of the projects, for example, that we've built here. These are all examples of libraries in R, so we use R quite extensively. R is a very simple scripting language that's used primarily by the stats and applied stats communities. It's as languages go, it hardly even qualifies as a language. It's really a scripting way of representing the abstract things that statisticians care about. So a simple way of, say, specifying equations and relationships in variables, and then seeing graphs about those. R originally comes out of a language called S. S was created at Bell Labs, just down the hall from when they created C at the same time. So that's the history. C's been around for a long time, and S has been around just as long as that. R is an open source version of S that's a little bit more capable and more broadly used now. So these are all packages that we sort of built, and it's sort of the set of tools that people in my group, the Stats and Analytics group, care about. Packages for missing data, packages for matching if you're interested in looking at experiments, or you've heard about potential outcomes or causal analysis. Packages for how do you ask surveys and make sure that they're comparable across languages. So, if the World Health Organization goes to a developing country and says, how healthy are you today? And then they go to France and ask somebody, how healthy are you today? How do you make sure that the question means the same in both languages, and also the scale means the same? Because if you're comparing yourself to your peers, those might be very different answers. How to deal with, how to make analysis from aggregated data, like in elections, ecological inference problems, how to redistrict, how to cluster documents that qualitative social scientists might create and realize, oh, I normally all I do is I read texts, but I've suddenly found I've got 150,000 texts and I'm not going to read all of them, so can I actually do something quantitative? So clustering methods for looking at texts. How to deal with predicting things that almost never occur. So models for rare events. There's a famous paper by Gary on predicting the probability of events that have never happened. And that's a difficult statistical problem. It's not. And then counterfactuals. The best way to, this is an interesting machine learning technique that has been developed here. Called verbal autopsies, which says it's where they've shown, it's generally the case, increasingly true, that statistical models are better than experts in those disciplines for making predictions, right? So that's at the heart of, say, quantitative empirical ways of stock trading that sort of take stockbrokers out of it, or sabermetrics. The statistical model can pick good baseball players that expert scouts were sort of ignoring. This is an example where a statistical model does a better job of predicting why you died than the person who conducted the autopsy on you. So this is ask the people who knew the person just before they died what was going on with them, and run a machine learning process on that. And and you can learn. Well, he was coughing a lot and he was sweaty all the time. You can do a pretty good job of predicting why somebody died, and that's useful in the developing world, because in lots of cases, 95% of the population that dies is not going to get an autopsy or even get a cause of death. But if you want to track health trends and understand sort of where you should be shipping antibiotics, you want to know where people are dying. Bayesian forecasting, and then Zelig. So I finally got to Zelig. I probably spent too much time on all the other models that we work on. But Zelig is a R package that sort of abstracts. There's 5,500 different packages in R. R is a giant open source project where different experts in different particular domains might write a package that says, this is exactly the way to implement this statistical model that I just dreamed up last week and only I know about. But I'm going to write a paper about it, and I'm going to create a package that now anybody can do what I just did. Okay, a way of sort of sharing in an open way, open statistical methods. The problem with that is you've got 5,500 different conventions for how your data should be structured and what an analysis model should look like and what your arguments are going to be called. So every time you use a different one of these packages, you have to learn the way, the API that particular person has used, the way of thinking about data that's specific to that person's discipline, perhaps. And so Zelig is a wrapper or bridging software, a way of abstracting and saying, if you learn one convention, if you learn one way of understanding how to represent a statistical model, then you can connect to all these other packages that you might have to learn individually, separately. So it's a library that allows you to use lots of different R packages, but only use one call structure, common call structure. Also, each of those individual packages might or might not have the exact statistical utility you use, depending upon whether it was interesting or useful to the original researcher. So there are lots of sort of abstract statistical tools like bootstraps or constructing confidence intervals or out-of-sample forecasting that are common tools and work across statistical models, but they might not have been implemented in a particular package because that author didn't need it in his work. And so Zelig was sort of like, say, well, here's a package, but you need to bootstrap. Okay, there isn't a bootstrap in that package, but I'll provide you one because it's a common language. The reason why this is the most interesting of these packages for this particular problem is that one goal that we've had eventually is then to allow these statistical models that we're developing in Zelig slowly to exist in a privacy-preserving function a privacy-preserving way. So either the tools that we will develop that report back differentially private statistics might eventually become their own separate model, own separate package in this list, and we'll have a library of tools that exist for statistical models, or maybe they will be a branch of things that you can get to in Zelig, or maybe we will come up with some abstract way of saying anything that's in Zelig we can make differentially private. Those are other possible goals. So we work a lot in R, and a lot of the people who are working in differential privacy will be working in R. It's very nice. It's a nice language to prototype things up. It gets things up and running fast. The applied statistics community uses it a lot. So if you write things in R, other people will be using it. This is Zelig. It's named after a Woody Allen movie. I will give a quick explanation of how Zelig works when we have a more detailed R course tomorrow, I believe. But here's your first R code. If you've not seen R before, it's reasonably simple code. This is all that I need, for example, to run a complete statistical model predicting vote as a function of age and race, and interpret the model in ways that anybody who doesn't know statistics would be able to see, and construct a whole bunch of graphs to explain what my statistical model did. So statistical model in a page, and half of that page was saying, oh, I need to load up the library of Zelig. Okay, so it's a very simple call structure for running statistical models. And you get back from, say, a page like that, a whole bunch of different graphs, visual representations of what's going on in your statistical model. So here's the probability of voting if I am age 36 and non-black. Here's the probability of voting if I am older and also non-black. So my probability of voting just went up. Here are distributions of expected values. Here's the change in the probability distribution that you might vote. So by getting 10 years older, you got 3% more likely to vote, and all sorts of other summary statistics of the statistical model that you just ran, constructed automatically by Zelig. And a lot of these are the style of statistical results that we might also try to make differentially private, right? So present these kinds of graphs in ways that can't be used, can't be attacked to actually learn about individuals, but still give useful representations of the statistical model that's underlying it, even if you can't see the raw data you ran the statistical model on. Okay, some more graphs that Zelig constructs that are really just pretty. So they're there. Last piece of software that I'll talk about today is, oops, sorry. I was trying to see what time it was.
2:41.
Perfect. Last piece of software that I'll talk about today is, are we not working today? Damn it. It's two ravens. Vito's left the room, but Vito and I work a lot on this software. This is an interface for quick exploration and statistical analysis of data that is sitting in Dataverse. Okay, so it on the one hand, it is a statistical interface for running statistical models on data sets that are in a repository. That's a one way of explaining what Two Ravens does. On the other hand, it never touches data, so it doesn't actually know what a data set is, and it doesn't actually run statistical models. So it's an interface for running statistical models on data sets that never touches data and doesn't know what a statistical model is. It is really just an interface, a very thin layer that says, what is it you want from a model, and then sort of abstracts those things away. So it's named after two of the ravens that were companions to Thor. I can explain the story. Sorry? Why
not two dogs?
Why not two dogs? Well, so what the ravens do is the ravens go all around the world, watching the world and reporting back what's going on. Okay, and they're called thought and memory in the original language. Sorry, Odin. To the original language. So they tell Odin what he should be thinking and what he should be remembering. And so the analogy here is that there are these two pieces of the software that are telling the user who wants to run a statistical model what the data can tell him to think about the world, and also what other people who have run similar models to you, this is the memory aspect, what other people who have run similar models to you have also found out about the world that might help you. Okay? But that's an abstract name. It's just two ravens. It sounds, the URL had not been taken, right? So here's the architecture for how Two Ravens works. Is that correct? This is a better one. This is a better architecture. This is an architecture that's closer to what, this is actually really the architecture that we use for the Two Ravens interface. And so what we have here is a thin layer. This is the front end that a user will actually see. A user themselves are going to see an interface, something on a browser perhaps, that they can interact with. And from that, they can say, I would like to know what data sets exist in Dataverse. So at an application layer, here's the big expansive code that exists in Dataverse and all the instance itself that handles the storing and preserving and metadata of a data set. And so a user can say, okay, I would like to talk to Dataverse and find out what data sets exist here that are private, that I can't see but I can interact with. And I would also, when I found a data set I'm interested in, I might like to ask a query to it. What's the mean of this variable you tell me is in this data set? Okay, so I can make queries to the data set, and the queries themselves, again, are not at the user layer. So I am not taking a data set and downloading it to the user layer and running a computation. I'm saying I have found at the application level that there is a data set that I'm interested in. I would like to make a query to it at the survey layer level. Go and get into that data set that you're not going to allow me to see, and can you give me an answer to a question that would be useful to me as a researcher? Okay, so at the server layer, where it might be protected, the data is stored. We're going to talk to R running on an Apache server, so we're going to talk to a web instance of R. That might make some calls. Okay, you want a mean, you say? Okay, let me see if I have an ability to construct a mean in a differentially private way from all the different things that I know how to do because different interns have written different pieces of code for this library. Yes, there is a mean there. Let me talk to Dataverse and find out what the mean is, if that exists, if that's been computed for that particular variable, stored on the, in a private way attached to that data set in the metadata perhaps. Is there a private mean that's already been generated for that data set? If there is, okay, then you can have it and we pass it back to the user. What's important here, and maybe we also have to talk to Zelig to find out how to do a regression or something like that. But what's important here is that we have this interface layer, and unlike RStudio or SPSS or Stata, we're not actually touching the data itself. We're asking questions of the data. The data is sitting in a secure server layer. We're speaking through an intermediary application, but we ourselves are not touching the data. Okay? Here's an example of what let me just see if I can pull this up. It's a lot of load today. Here's Dataverse. Here's a data set that you'll probably want to play with eventually. It's one of the key test data sets we've been using. This is a 5% random sample of census reports, census answers from California. If I click on this, it will say, oh, look, here is a small version of the data set that I've allowed to be explored. If I press the Explore button, okay, here's the Two Ravens interface, and it doesn't scale very well on this very small projector, which is my problem and not yours. But let me see if I open it up this way. No, that doesn't help too much. Okay, so here are some of the variables that it's chosen. I don't really like any of those variables, so I'm going to get rid of some of those variables. I'm going to say, maybe I'm interested in predicting what your income is out from, say, your age and your education, or maybe your gender. So I've thrown those variables into my model, and unfortunately I can't see them all at the same time right now because of some scaling issue. But again, I'm going to start to play around with the data. I'm going to say, oh, look, here's income. What's going on in the income in my data set? And scaling issue. Let's see what's going on. Here's income. It's got a mean, it's got a median, it's got a most frequent observation, it's got a standard deviation, this many valid observations in my subset. Here's a bunch of summary statistics. You can understand whether that's the variable you thought it was, whether income really has the distribution you expected. Here's a little plot of it. It's heavily right-tailed. A few people are making a lot of income. Most people are making moderate income. And then maybe I can construct a model and say I'd like to explain income as a function of age and education. And then perhaps if we get private regression by the end of the day, I might say, oh, that's a model I'd like to run. Let's think of income as my outcome variable, my dependent variable. Let's run that model, and it's going to report back, okay, so here's a regression. I'm going to predict income as a function of age and education. The older you get, every unit of age you have, that's an extra year. Every time you celebrate a birthday, you're going to have an income that goes up on average by about $300. And as your education goes up 1 unit on this scale, it's going to go up 3 times 10 to the third dollars, so $3,000 as you get each unit of education. I'll tell you that this is a linear model, so it assumes that as you get older and as you get better educated, you get paid more. But that's, this is probably a nonlinear process. If you go to graduate school and then get more education, your income's going to plummet precipitously. Okay, but this is the interface that we've constructed for, again. Nothing here on this browser knows what a data set is or knows what a statistical model is. It's just an interface for saying, what would you like to know about this variable? What can I tell you? What kinds of models are you interested in running? The data itself is staying in Dataverse. And if it's private data, hopefully it's a secure instance of Dataverse that nobody else can see. The modeling itself is occurring on a remote server that I'm talking to, but I'm not actually running any models here. And so this is the interface. When we've talked a lot about an interface for private tools, this is one of the key interfaces that we'll be developing. And as you add new components to it, new features should hopefully be added to this interface. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Is this analysis a real analysis?
Yeah, that's analysis on a subsample of 2,000 census observations.
Then I think I don't touch the data, isn't it?
I'm sorry?
If it is real, then the Raven touch the real data.
Okay, so the client, that is the browser that I'm looking at, hasn't touched the data. But it has said, I'm interested in running a model on income as a function of age and education, and said that that's the model I'm interested in constructing, sent that to R remotely. And on the server said, okay, well, then if I'm going to run that regression, I need to see the data. The server has touched the data and run the model on the server end, and then reported back, okay, I'm not going to tell you what the data is, in this case, but I can tell you that these are the coefficients that I estimated on the data. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's a good way of walking through the interface one more time. Yes? Sure. What, sorry? Yes. That would be good to know. Yes. Ideally, if I had better, so things like units are normally something I look to the code book for, right? So in the code book, it should say, this is a scale, education is a scale of 1 to 14, and 13 means you have some postgraduate work, and 12 means you graduated from college, right? That's the kind of information that should exist in the code book. If the code book exists well, then that information could be harvested and put into the metadata. And if it exists in the metadata, then we would see it in the summary statistics here. Okay? However, it's a case that when I uploaded this little test snippet of data, I did not upload enough information to populate the metadata. So if that existed, it would be towards the top. It would explain what the units were. But I don't know what it is in this case. And that's why metadata is so important. If you're thinking about an automatic way of dealing with a repository, if there isn't enough information in the metadata to make sense of what the data actually means, then you're grounded. Right? And that's why the first day of this conference is entirely about how do we construct metadata so repositories can talk to each other and we can do things automatically across repositories without having to read code books. Okay. So that's a great question. What's the mean of gender?
The average gender is 0.5.
Yeah. That's true in most census districts, but not all. There are some that are like 0.9, 0.95, and if you ever go to a women's prison, that will be your census district, and that will be the mean of gender in that particular district. Yes.
As far as the Two Ravens jurisdiction goes over restricted data sets, can it see, for example, like restricted data sets metadata or even summary statistics?
Okay, so a lot of this is very much at a prototype phase. When Jack talks on Friday, he will guide you through the way the prototype currently works. And there's always big distinctions rather, between how the prototype currently works and what we envision the architecture to be, right? So yes, I will talk in the affirmatively, as in we should be able to see the metadata, and anything that exists in the metadata should be a privacy-preserving form of information. So there is an architecture where we say, let's construct a version of the metadata that only contains privacy-preserving statistics. So if it's got a mean in there, it's not a real mean. It's a privacy-preserving mean, a mean with some noise added to it, perhaps. And that's the kind of information that I can directly populate Two Ravens with. And then there are questions, as some of the people who are working on different projects are going to talk about interactive queries, whereby I want to know something that's not already in the metadata. I want to know something new, or I want to add something to the metadata, or add something to the set of things that I might know. And that's again a more involved question. So there 2 Ravens is actually eventually through the server talking to the data and running a model on the data too. So that's an active problem in the architecture. But generally, it only talks to the metadata. Okay. Any other questions? I've run long, but that should be a good grounding of our tools. I will talk tomorrow mostly about how to use R, because a lot of us will be using R, but obviously you're welcome to, people who aren't using R but want to see R can see some of that. We have a break now, yes. I understand. Can I just say structurally, those of you who are working, did you want to talk at all about like the pragmatics of offices and things? Because this is a very good moment for people who need keys to this building to get keys to this building during this break, because Cassie is around. Is that something?
Yes, now would be a good time.
Okay. All right. So I understand that there are offices distributed across the campus for different people. If you are going to be working a lot in IQSS, then you should get a key for the office that we've constructed for the RIU students here at IQSS. There is a large office. There are a number of interns across different projects. We've reserved 4 desks for the RIU students in that office, and they should be sort of first come, first serve hot desks. That is, I'm not going to assign them to people, because I think there are probably more than 4 people who might occasionally want to drop by IQSS and work. So if you're working all the time in IQSS, then you probably want to get a key if you think you might occasionally spend a couple days here, or you're working jointly, say with me and or me and Vivesh, or anything else. Go ahead and get a key, and then I will show you people at some point where the desks are for this project. And again, we'll try to come to social understanding about who gets a desk when or something. But I imagine it'll work out. It should be 4 desks should be sufficient. So you'll need
This is in addition to space that's available.
Yes. So that's what I meant. Do you want to discuss like the overarching way that that's going to work?
Yes. So we have for the REU students, for the REU students, you have a desk in MD 136. I will be getting your keys as early as this evening. So hopefully I'll see you all tomorrow, so I can distribute those then.